Alright, so now that we completed sewing our muslin mock-ups for our pants, what we're going to do is we're going to do a fitting back to our dress form. When we get back to the dress forms, I'm going to talk through some different issues that I'm noticing with my own pants, as well as different issues that you might be having with yours. At some point, we'll come back to the tabletop here and we'll talk through all the different issues and the solutions to resolve them. What I'm going to do is I'm going to split this up into two different videos. So one of them is mostly for those of you watching on YouTube and you just want to get right to the point, hey, I'm having an issue with such and such, how do I fix it? The other video is going to be where I'm mostly just talking about how I'm going to fix mine. So for instance, I do a fitting back to the dress form. There's a couple issues with it that I don't like. And then I go ahead and I fix those issues, not only on the muslin, but then back on the paper. And then to follow up to end that video, it's more for my students. So the ending is, of course, we go into oak tag paper, we put on all of our notches, and then get all of our guidelines back here in blue. So if you're interested in the second video, you can also watch that to see what are some of the solutions that I had to do to get my pants totally fitting perfectly until I came back and did a custom block that's ready to go. All right, so let's get started on working on just the different types of issues that you might be having in general. All right, so this is going to be the follow-up video we did a draft for women's pants, and then we did a test mock-up sewing in muslin fabric. Now we're coming back here to the dress form to do a test fit. What I'm going to do is, first I'll cover just the things you should look for during a test fit, and then I'm going to talk about some of the fixes and changes that I personally want to do to my own pair of pants from the demo, fitting back to this dress form. Now, when you're doing a test fit with a live model, something that I should have mentioned in the video when we were adding seam allowance and cutting and sewing, up here in the waist area, you want to have a good 3 inches extra of seam allowance. You would still sew your stay stitch right along that same exact line that you want for the waist. And then what your client can do is they could put these pants on well above their waist, and then you'll come back again with that elastic cord so they can have that elastic cord fit it exactly where they had it before, and then you come in and adjust the pants so then you'll have that stay stitch right where they have the elastic cord, and you'll always have a little bit of seam allowance above that's just kind of rippling and floating around. For me, since I'm just working on a dress form, I just did my basic 1/2 inch seam allowance here at the top, and then the stay stitching perfect right on that waistline. I have it pinned back here to the dress form right at the waistline. Something you're going to always want to remember when you're doing a test fit is this is all the way back up to her natural waist. And there's no pants or jeans that you wear up into this area. So at first it's counterintuitive. Your client's going to want to keep pulling the pants down a little bit, and you pinning this, you might even accidentally start pinning it a little bit too low. So just really keep in mind that this waistline that you're looking at is the natural waist. Of course, eventually, we're going to develop waistbands and a cut line that's much lower, especially in jeans. You're going to take off a good 3 inches from the top of this. So what we have here is, this is a basic pant block. So it's not for jeans. This is more like a trousers that you would wear, like work pants. If you have a client where they want to wear a really nice pair of pants to work, perfect fitting, and they're going to have the pleat in the front and the pleat in the back. You might also have like the mother of the bride, and she wants to wear like a pantsuit to the wedding instead of a dress. This would be a custom pant draft for that particular occasion. This particular pant draft, you're going to see this all the time on runways and such, because it's just a classic fitting and it's a classic silhouette. So basically what we have is down here at the ankles, we gave it a 14-inch circumference, and then you can see the pleat is coming back up to where her tummy would be, and then the back pleat is coming back up here to her fullest hip in the back. So you have that nice look where it's just got this clean, crisp pleat going all the way down, and then as they're walking, their knee is just inside of here moving around, but the pants just have a nice even flow to them. And of course, in the future, you'd put like a side seam pocket in here, or maybe even some kind of a 3/4 slash pocket. Now, one of the things you're going to want to know from your client is, how does it feel in between the legs? And at first, they're going to say, oh, it feels all right. But what you want them to do is kind of walk around, sit down, stand up, sit back down, stand up again. And you just want to see, is it pulling too tight in this area? Another thing that we're looking for is up here in the waist. Is it too loose or too tight? So for instance, on mine here in the back, it's a little bit too loose, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then you want to move down, how's the tummy area? Everybody is breathing not only in the rib cage, but they're also breathing in their diaphragm. So you have to make sure that there's some room and ease in this area, or else they're always going to not like their pants. It'll feel too tight. The next one is when you come down in here to the full hip area. So you want to make sure it's nice and smooth going all along the backside, as well as up here in the hips area. It fits her really well. And then out along here going along the crotch area. You don't want to see any whiskers or pulling here in the crotch area. If you're starting to see some pulling in this area, then the distance coming down to the full hip probably wasn't enough for your client, and the crotch curve here is starting to kind of pull and compete with that. So you might need a little more distance here and a little more distance and relaxed in the crotch, the total crotch measurement. Over here on the back side, so you want it to be smooth all the way across. And then, of course, this pleat will start here from the apex and then drop down nice and smooth. Again, if you're seeing some strange pulling in this area, the back center seam might be too tight on her. In my instance, it's just right. I just need to fix these darts. And then you might see some kind of horizontal creases here, especially if she has a flat tush. And there's some solutions to that for when you're doing the curve of the back crotch. So the pant draft that we did was basically for a women's basic trouser, size like 2 through 12. If you're doing plus size women's, there's a few other rules that you need to know, and I'll tell you about that in a little bit. And then, of course, if you're doing the draft for men's, there's a few other adjustments as well. What you're going to want to do is, when your fit model is wearing their pants, you're going to want her to walk around, sit down, stand up, back up, and walk around some more and sit down and stand up again. And you're trying to determine, is it too tight in between the legs? Now, for me, since I'm working off of a dress form, once I have my pants on here correctly, I can come and see and just make sure there's some room and ease in between the legs there. If it is too tight, what's going on is when you measured from the side seam down for the crotch level line plus some ease, if you only gave her 1/2 inch ease or you measured it incorrectly, then potentially it's too tight. As well as the total curve, the total crotch curve might be a little bit too short. Now in this instance, you don't need to do a redraft. There is a simple fix using the horizontal balance line, and I'll show you how to do that on the tabletop. Basically what's happening is when we measured from the side seam waist down the crotch depth plus some ease, if it's too tight on her when she sits down and stands up, then you needed a longer measurement or more ease. Now something you're going to notice is you cannot change this area up in here. So the hip level distance, all of this area up in this here for the waist darts, don't touch any of that. What you're going to want to do is basically this crotch depth level, you're going to wish that you had drafted it lower, or potentially if she's saying her pants are too baggy, too saggy, especially in the back area, if she feels like the back is very saggy looking, the crotch would need to be higher. So instead of completely redrafting it, the solution is you would cut your patterns along the hip level line, and then you can add room or take away room in this area. And basically you can see then this crotch level will move down and move up. Now, when you move into a more mature figure, they're going to want lots of room. So for instance, on this size 6, I just gave a little bit of maybe like ½ inch of room, but as you get into an older client, they're going to want a good inch of room in there. Also, if you're doing a pant draft for men, men are going to want lots of room down in this area as well. Eventually, if you start to do a pant draft where you're tailoring the legs down and making the crotch a little bit tighter for jeans, then of course, for sure, you'll just have a little ½ inch of ease in that area. Okay, so when you're taking a look here along the waist, you want to see obviously if it's fitting too loose or too tight. Now the reason we sewed the darts coming to the outside is because if it is too loose, obviously you can just clip the stay stitching, and then you can come in here with some pins and start pinning this a little bit tighter. And what I would recommend is do a little bit on all 4 darts to start to see how it feels. It's tempting at first to try and do a lot just on 1 dart, so always just do a little bit. And don't forget, you still have more darts here in the back that will affect the full circumference all the way around. So for instance, on mine, I did some adjustments to the back darts, but I left the front darts alone. And then of course, I'm always coming back to make sure that this side seam is still straight up and down and you're not pulling it to one side or the other. If you need to loosen this area, then that's another reason why the darts are sewn to the outside. You can come in here and go ahead and just pop all of this dart stitching, pull it out, and just sit here and pin them by hand. Something else is, on my particular dress form, because she's got smaller legs and she has a very flat stomach, the ease that I gave her here in the fullest part of her hip was a little bit too much ease. So when I took my measurements during the video, at the fullest hip, my measurement I came up with was 35 1/4. So I added a little bit of ease already to the measurement. Plus, when we do the draft, you add 1 more inch of ease. But now that I look at it here on my girl, I think that I would rather go with just 35. So not adding any ease during the measurement. So I would just do 35 flat, and then maybe 3/4 of an inch or even 5/8 of an inch of extra ease. And then we would have just a little less puffiness here on that crease. So you can almost imagine if we were to come in here and just take a 1/4 inch pinch all the way down to the knee and just get rid of a little bit of this excess volume in here. So again, when we're looking at this on the tabletop, basically what I'm noticing is there's a little too much volume in this area. And so, like I said, it would be tempting to just splice it down the grain line and overlap them to get rid of some of that area. But if you recall, we have all of our measurements splayed out all the way from center front to center back, finding the side seams, setting up your grains, and then all the way down to the ankles. So you can't just slice that and move this in. Basically on my pants, what I would need is this hip level distance should have been a little bit shorter. So I would probably take off like 1/2 inch and do a complete redraft. And then once you come in and you draft with your new smaller full hip measurement, then of course as you divide it up, find your side seam, divide up all the different waist darts here, and then develop the curve for the crotch. It's going to be a totally different pant draft, and it'll fit her just a little bit better. If it's a plus size figure or a mature figure, then leave that 1 inch of ease, and they're going to actually love this fit right here. And most likely they'll have more of a tummy at that age, as well as they just want some room and they just want it to fit and flow off of their body really nicely. So if it's a younger model and they're smaller, you don't have to have quite as much ease. I think also on my girl, because her legs are pretty small, and just looking at her general silhouette, when we did the 14-inch circumference for the ankles, I might even trim just a little bit off of that. So maybe 13.5 inches total, and then divide it between the front and back, along with making a shorter full hip measurement. I think that would give a really nice kind of slimming look, but you would still have the classic crease in the front and the back, and it would still be a classic work trouser. Now for my model, she has a relatively small tummy, so it's pretty flat in this area. You always want to make sure that you still have some room and ease in this area, because not only is she breathing with her rib cage, but you're also breathing into your diaphragm. Plus, when you sit down and stand up, your stomach kind of sticks out a little bit and pops back to flat, so you want to have that room inside of there for everyone. Now when you move into more of a plus size, where you might have the smaller waist, but then a stomach that's protruding out further, this is where you start to move into kind of the same shaping as the back. And what you're going to need is a longer crotch distance. So if you remember on this size here, what we did was we took the crotch level line from center front to the side seam, and we split it into fourths, and we took that fourth and extended it out to get the crotch shaping. Well, on a plus size or someone with the larger stomach, then you'll split that distance into thirds to get a longer crotch distance coming back in to this inseam here. And I'll show you how to do that on the tabletop. When you move into the plus sizes, so when we're doing 14, 16, and larger, the front crotch here, you actually want some more room, because your client's going to have a little bit of a pooch belly, and you're going to want to have more room for that whole crotch area, similar to menswear. So actually, you would take the crotch level line and divide this into thirds and come out 1/3 to give her a longer curve. Now, if you remember when I was developing my crotch curve for women's, and I was doing size 6, and down here at the crotch level and center front, I came up 1 inch and 1/8. Most of the time, for just your average woman, you would come out 1 1/4 inches. And it's the same rule for plus sizes as well, so it would be 1 1/4 inches. But when you're doing this for menswear, you're going to want to do at least 1.5 inches. And then for some menswear, even up to 1 3/4 inches. Especially if you have a large man, very tall, large, and you're taking this crotch distance from center front to the side seam, and you're dividing it into thirds and bringing 1/3 out to here to give them more room in the front area, then you would of course have 1 3/4 inches for that curve to guide you. And you'll notice that the crotch seam, the crotch level line is lower, so it's going to be a longer French curve shape, and it would look similar to what I have here for my women's size 6 in the back. Let's talk some more about the fit back here in the back. So looking at this dress form in particular, how this fits in the back here is perfect. And this is basically what you're looking for. And you'll notice a lot of times when you go buy pants, a lot of times the first thing is you're trying to see, like, how does it fit in the back? If this was a little bit saggy and baggy in the back area, then probably the crotch depth, the crotch level line was a little too low, and the total crotch measurement was a little too long, so there's just a little too much fabric back here. If you want to have more of this kind of a lift fit look, that's a shorter and shorter crotch level and the shorter crotch distance. So on this girl in particular, I have about 1/2 inch of ease inside of here. And then that's what's giving that really nice fit right in this area. If you're noticing, it's got this weird kind of horizontal wrinkles in here, then basically if she has a real flat tush, what's happening is the crotch curve is taking too long to go in between here. So if you think about someone that has a flat tush, basically it's coming down and quickly turning in to where their leg is. And what you need is your crotch curve should be doing the same thing. So let me show you how to do that on the tabletop. All right, so let's take a closer look here at adjusting this back crotch curve for a flat tush scenario. So if you recall, the center back went straight up and I came in 1/2 inch, up 1/2 inch, and then I straightened that heading back down towards this full hip level. And then we also had from the crotch level at center back, we came out 1 3/4 inches for a guideline. And then we use this as a mark for bringing our French curve to blend here into the crotch level. And that's how we came up with this curve. Now for the flat tush, what you could do is following along this 45-degree angle, you could come down to 1.5 inches, and then you're going to want to reblend, so get your ruler back up here at center back, and then the French curve, we're going to come down to where we're hitting this 1.5 inch mark as well as the crotch level line. And what I'll do is I'll put this in red so you can see it more clearly. So this would be the beginning stages of doing an adjustment for a flat tush. So now what I would do is I would do this adjustment on my muslin, sew it, do a test fit back to your client, and see how well it's fitting. If you notice that you're still getting some horizontal wrinkles and you still want to take some more fabric out, we can do a little bit more of an extreme adjustment. So the next version would be, you could come all the way down to 1 1/4 inches, which would be right here. And basically what's happening is we're getting a tighter, shorter L shape for an extreme version of a flat tush. Now the problem with coming down so low is once I line up my ruler back here at center back and I bring in my French curve, and I'm trying to come back and hit that original crotch level, you'll end up having kind of a little bit of a weird corner right here and up in this area. So what we could do is here at the crotch level line and the inseam, you can drop down up to 1/2 inch. So in this example, what I'll do is I'll drop down 1/2 inch. I put a little mark right there. And I'm going to go ahead and circle this in blue. And then this is my new location here. So again, this is 1 1/4 inch. I'll put a blue mark right there and circle it. And what we're looking for is you want to stick with your original back because so far you like how it's fitting in her lower back. And as we bring this French curve down to hit the same lower back angle and then touching here at our 1.25 inches, if I curve this back towards the lower back, then what you're going to find is the French curve is above this crotch level line. And we can turn that into it's starting to head now towards this 1.5 inches going below the crotch level line. And you're getting an even tighter L-shaped angle for an extreme version of a flat tush. And then you'll come back in and make sure you're blending everything nice and pretty. So let me fix this and we'll do it in blue. So here you can see our red is coming back up to 0, and it's somewhere in between the two and going back to the original crotch level line. And then our more extreme version is still 0 up here at the lower back, but it's coming down and doing a tighter L shape. And then to make it blend pretty, we have it coming down to dropping a ½ inch below this right here. And basically I would do the red version first, do a test fitting, and then if it's still a little bit baggy or there's still a horizontal crease, then I would come in and I would do the blue version. And you can do all of this directly onto your muslin and test it first and then come back and draft it. Of course, you can imagine there's some other locations in between these as well, so where you can really come in and fine-tune the fit. Now, if you end up moving this point downwards to match a tighter L-shaped curve, then of course you need your front to, starting from the original seam, you need to drop it down ½ inch and reblend this curve as well. So if I were to come in here and use this new blue from that new back crotch curve, I would need to come in here with my French curve here on the front and reblend this from this location, my original location here, which I was doing 1 1/8" for my size 6, and then blending back up into center front. So that would be my adjustment to match back to this extreme version. Now sometimes the 1 3/4, even just on a regular person, so maybe they just have a normal shape and they're size 2, size 0, and maybe you want to take a little bit off because it was kind of baggy in the back, and maybe also you need to bring the crotch level up a little bit. As well, when you move here into the back area, you just want to see how well is it fitting with the darts on the front, the darts in the back, and how is it cupping here into the lower back area. One thing that people will complain about a lot is they're always pulling up their pants in the back, and that's just because you didn't give them enough length here in the back and it's not cupping nicely into the lower back. So if you recall, at one point the center of the back went straight up, and then we went in ½ inch and up ½ inch to get it to cup into her lower back. Now, the larger that her back is coming out beyond her leg, you're going to notice that there's going to be a larger gap between center back and her lower back. Especially if this sticks out quite a bit, but she still has a little waist, you're going to have an extreme version of that gap. So on the tabletop, what we'll do is I'll show you some other variations where you would actually come in 3/4 inch and up 1 inch, and maybe even in 1 inch and up 2 inches when you really get into plus sizes. So moving into size 14 and larger, you're going to use the same exact 1 inch and 3/4 to find your back crotch curve. So keep that the same. But the solution for the plus size is you're already going to have a lot more room here at the hip level from that original measurement, making sure that you're getting the largest measurement possible all the way around their pant area. And then you'll keep this 1 3/4 inches here. And then as you're coming up to the back, if you recall, the back used to be just a straight line to here. And then on these smaller sizes, we came in ½ inch and up ½ inch. Well, on the plus sizes, you're going to come in 3/4 inch and up 1 inch. And then as you move into even more extra large sizes in the plus size area, and you're doing test fits back to your clients, you might notice that you could even come in 1 inch and up 2 inches and get that new back shaping coming back to this 1.75 inch area right here. And then of course you'll notice your crotch will be a little bit longer and the leg itself will be much wider. And then when you go back and you cut that out in muslin and do a test fit, if you have all your seams to the outside, you can come back in and start pinching your seams and get that shaping a little more perfected. So if you want to work on this to develop the shaping cupping into the back, you can release this stay stitch so we can get the seam allowance to stick out here. And then you can come in and you can start working on your shaping by either taking away and making this a tighter fit, or you could take this stitch apart all the way down to here and go ahead and start to add some fabric back into this by pinning it going into the seam allowance. On the menswear, you'll notice that the crotch level and the hip line are further apart. Because basically menswear, you don't need to come down as far to measure your hip level. And then the crotch, you want to give them more room in the crotch area. So this curve here will actually already be quite a bit larger and longer of a curve. And then coming up for a men's lower back area, when we came straight up from center back, and we had our measurement from the waist all the way to the ankle. For men's, you would come in 3/4 and up 3/4. And then, of course, as you moved into larger size men or plus size men, you can even come in 1 inch and up 1 inch, 1.5 inches, depending on their body shape. As well on the men's, you'll notice that you don't need all this room for the darts here, so it's just going to be one dart in this area. Another thing you want to check is just how is this fitting right here at the full hip. So there obviously should be some ease in here, but once you get down here to the back side, it should be pretty smooth right along the back side. And then you can see the pleat here is coming right off of that apex area. Now when you're checking here at the side seam shaping, everybody's largest measurement at their full hip is in a different location. So for instance, on the draft, we came down 7 inches, boom, that's your full hip measurement. But on men's, it would be coming down 6 inches, and on taller people, it would be a little bit longer. But also some people, their fullest hip is much lower than this area. And you're gonna notice that when you're making custom pants, this shaping here is gonna be custom to each different individual. So when we're drafting this flat on the tabletop, we're using the variform curve to come and curve it here into her waist. But you can also have this variform curve as part of the shaping, which is going to match your actual client or back to yourself. So don't be afraid to kind of move this around and get a sense of what is my client's shaping compared to the variform curve. And then you can take this back to the tabletop and draft it and fix it. Now for me, when I'm doing a fitting back with my client, I like having the darts to the outside because usually this is your usual fix on the darts. But sometimes you need to come back in here and pinch this side seam. If you want, you can always have the side seam allowances facing outwards so you can come in and start doing that fix quickly. Another solution to this is just go ahead and turn the pants inside out, put them back on, and you can start fixing the side seams. For the menswear, men's waist isn't as small as this. So where their hips are compared to where their waist is, it's a smaller curve coming into here. So when we take the side seam and we split it up to where we moved out 3/4, out 3/4, so then it comes and has a shaping. For men, you only need to go out 3/8 and out 3/8 and have a smaller amount of shaping. For some of your clients that are women, same thing. They might have where their hips and their waist is a very close measurement, so you might end up doing the same thing for a women's draft as well. And the opposite could be true where if her hips really stick out far, but then come into a tight, small waist area, then you might even move into 3/4 to 1 inch to get that shaping. And then when you come back and you do a test fit with your model, I would recommend have a good 1-inch seam allowance so you can come in here and pinch more or take those threads out and relax it back to get that custom shaping going back into their hip area and their waist area. Now, taking a quick look here, the shaping for the side seam on my final block, you'll notice that it's a straight line down in this area, and then it's a nice clean curve all the way back up to the waist here. But when I had done the original draft, what it was a perfect straight line going from the ankle all the way here to the crotch level. So I just had a straight line the whole way, and then we came up a few inches and started to blend into the waist. So realistically, in this area right here, there's a little bit of a corner. Now during the video, I'm assuming everybody's just a beginner, so to try and tell them to go in and do shaping here sometimes gets a little bit confusing because I mostly want you to focus on the shaping for this area here. But of course, now that you've gone through the draft once, you know that when you see a little bump right here, there's kind of that sharp angle, that you would also resolve this as well before you start cutting and sewing your muslin mock-up. So here's where we blend it up into the waist area. And what you would do is you would take the same variform curve and bring it down here to where we can go from the hip level line and start to blend it heading back towards the knee, just trimming a little bit of this off of here. So now you can see I've taken away a little bit of that weird corner, and it's a smooth curve going from the knee past the crotch level and right up to the original hip level. Keep in mind you cannot trim anything off of the hip, or else these pants are going to start getting too tight on her and she won't be able to slip them on over her hips and then zip them up. And then of course, whatever change I made right here, so for instance, if I look at the crotch level line and it's lining up with my number 13 on the variform curve, I would need to slide over onto my back and get the exact same fix. So I'm putting that number 13 on the crotch level line. I'm coming up here to touch my hip level and then blending this back down into the knees. Now the reason why I'm telling you this later in the video is just because whenever I have beginners lining up a variform curve somewhere and then I tell them to slide it down and get some more fixes on there, I'll notice that they end up just putting another weird corner in another place and then they end up chasing their tail. So it's something where as you're using your tools and as you're seeing these curves and sewing them and doing fittings, then your eye gets a really good sense of what that curve should look like in its entirety. And now that I made that adjustment, of course I want to go fix it in my seam allowance. Alright, so let's talk here about the inseams. Now, as you're doing custom pants, of course you're going to have different hip widths, different crotch depths, and different lengths for your pants overall. Sometimes what's going to happen is, as you come in here, remember we established a 14-inch ankle circumference, and then we divided it between the front and back, and we made the back a little bit longer and the front a little bit shorter. And then during the draft, we had a point where you were going from the ankle up to the crotch level with just a straight line. And then we found the distance from at the knee level from that new side seam to the grain line, and then from the grain line to the inseam. And then when we squared up the inseam, in this area here, everybody, all of you, are going to have a different result. Now for me, how it worked out was my crotch is sticking out far enough to where I then needed to use a vary curve to blend from this straight line starting at the knee level and blend up to my crotch point. Most of you, that should be the case. But in some instances, you're going to notice that your line is basically just a straight line going the full distance. And that's okay. And you might notice this when you start to change your ankle circumference, or you move into plus sizes, as well as when you start moving the crotch depth levels. Then you'll find these scenarios where it ends up just being a straight line. So don't worry about that. Some companies will even be making just kind of a basic pajama pant where they have elastic at the top, and then they'll just have straight lines for their inseams, and everything's really quick and simple to sew on a production line. So it's not unusual to see that. Now, if you are noticing that when you line up your ankle to the knee level, and if the crotch curve is stopping behind your ruler, then you definitely made a mistake on your crotch distance coming out. And if you remember back when we had divided up the crotch level into fourths and we brought it out 1/4, you probably made a mistake somewhere during that measurement. Now, as you are looking at your final pants, and once you've gone through and you've done some changes and you've cut and sewed and fixed things and pressed it one last time, and you're doing basically your final fitting, you also want to just have a sense of, okay, what is this going to look like if I turn it into a skirt block or some shorts? And you're getting a sense of how the fit is working. Something else you want to know is if your client will just bend her knee a little bit, and you'll see different people's knee will hit in a different location. So you might want to know where that is on your particular client. So then later on, if you're trying to do a skirt that's just above the knee or maybe a little bit below the knee, at least you know where her knee is exactly. The knee level line that we have in here is based on the hip down to the ankle. And I would leave that on the draft because you need to know that that area going below there should be symmetrical. But it's just good to know where her knee is in particular. Also keep in mind when you're looking at these pants that nobody is actually going to wear their pants all the way here to their natural waist. Eventually you're going to cut off 2 inches to 3 inches of all of this, and the waistband is going to be somewhere here at her full or at her high hip level. And then even if you move down into kind of a hip hugger, it's still going to be down in this area. So you just want to have a good sense of how is the fit in this area here. And if it feels like it's a little bit loose, then you're going to know inside your head that once you cut along there to make these shorter so they fit along her high hip, that these pants might actually start to get a little bit too loose. So at some point you'll have to do a few adjustments to the dart or maybe even the side seams. But overall these look really good. I'm pleased with how it turned out. Be sure to watch the video where I do all of my changes to these exact pair of pants that you're looking at right now. I do the changes to the pants in the video as well as the changes back to my pattern pieces. And then I turn those patterns into my block slippers like you saw at the beginning of this video. Alright, so you can see from all of that, that's kind of just the tip of the iceberg. Realistically, you need to do a couple fittings back with your client, adjust the patterns, make some mistakes, chase your tail, figure it out. And as you go through the process, you'll get better and better at doing this. Inside of the book, of course, Connie has a whole bunch of chapters where she's just doing the mature fit and plus size fit draft totally from scratch. So if you are doing sizes 14 and larger, then you want to start actually drafting using the mature figure. And then she has a couple little differences inside of there. And then if you're doing the men's draft as well, then there's some changes that you would do for men's in particular. And then if you're doing smaller sizes for like girls and boys, there's a couple different things you would do on the draft. So all the information's in the book. As well, if you're going to do some something like stirrup pants, so for instance like yoga pants or something, then she's telling you the different measurements you would use because of stretch. And I'm going to do some more videos where we're going to talk about putting in yokes as well as waistbands, and then moving into pockets. And I'll show you a couple different ways to install zippers on pants, and that will help you determine how you're going to do it on the patterns as well. Also inside the book, if you wanted to take your pants and turn them into shorts and skirts, that's all based on this same exact block here. So you have your shorts and your skirts, it's already here. And then of course, if you wanted to go above the waist, so we start to move into having like jumpsuits and overalls, she has some chapters in here as well on how to do that. And of course, when you move into that area, you're going to want to have already known how to make like a torso block, and then you'll see how you'll combine those two with pants. Anyway, so I highly recommend the book. It also has some sewing tips for sewing pants and fly zippers and doing the different pockets. And then in the back of the book, she even has some full scale like pocket bag shaping. So I highly recommend the book if you're planning on taking these pants and doing all different types of designs. Now, when I was shooting the video talking about my pants specifically, my darts in the back were a little bit too loose. As well, the side seam was a little bit puffy down here in the, basically this would be like her thigh area. So if you're having issues with your waist being a little bit loose or too tight, I'll show you how to do that later, as well as some shaping for the legs, and as well as talking about if you have too much volume in your pants. Oh, there's a little ant right here. Hey, buddy.